Chapter 28, wherein is continued the wonderful adventures at the inn. While Don Quixote hung suspended between heaven and earth, his outcries were so terrible that the innkeeper ran to the door and opened it hastily, and in great fright to see who it was that roared so loud. Maritornes, whom the cries had also awakened, guessing what it was, ran to the hayloft, and unseen by anyone, loosed the halter that held up Don Quixote, and he fell at once to the ground in the sight of the innkeeper and the four travellers, who, coming up to him, asked him what ailed him. He, without any answer, slipped the halter from his wrist, and, rising to his feet, leaped on Rocinante, braced on his shield, couched his lance, and, wheeling round the field, rode back at a hand-gallop, crying out, "Whosoever shall dare to say that I have been with just title enchanted, if my lady, the Princess Micomicona, will give me leave to do it, I say that he lies, and I challenge him to single combat." The travellers were amazed at his words, but the host told them that they must not mind him, for he was out of his wits. When Don Quixote saw that none of the four travellers made any account of him or answered his challenge, he was ready to burst with wrath and fury, and could he have found that a knight-errant might lawfully accept and undertake another enterprise, having plighted his word and faith not to attempt any until he had finished that which he had first promised, he would have fallen upon them all, and made them give him an answer in spite of themselves. Those in the inn were now fully aroused, and had come with the innkeeper to see the new arrivals. Whilst they were talking to the four travellers, in the big room where they had supped, they heard a noise outside, the cause of which was that some dishonest guests, who had stayed there that night, seeing all the people busy to know the cause of the four horsemen coming, had thought to escape scot-free without paying their reckoning. But the innkeeper, who attended his own affairs with more diligence than other men's, stopped them going out and demanded his money, upbraiding their dishonest conduct with such words that they returned him an answer with their fists, and this they did so roundly that the poor innkeeper was compelled to cry for help. His wife and his daughter, seeing Don Quixote standing by, cried out to him, "Help, Sir Knight! Help my poor father, whom two wicked men are thrashing like a bundle of corn." To this Don Quixote answered leisurely and with great gravity, "Beautiful damsel, your prayer cannot at the present time be granted, for I am not permitted to engage in any new adventures until I have finished the one I have promised to carry through. And all that I can now do in your service is what I now say to you. Run unto your father, and bid him continue and maintain his battle manfully until I demand leave of the Princess Micomicona to help him out of his distress. For if she will give me leave, you may make sure that he will be delivered." "As I am a sinner," cried Maritornes, who was standing by, "before you get that leave you speak of, my master will be in the other world." "Permit me but to get the leave I speak of," replied Don Quixote, "and it matters not whether he be in the other world or no, for I would bring him back again, in spite of the other world itself, or at least I will take such a revenge on those that sent him there, that you shall be well content." Without saying more, he went in and fell on his knees before Dorothea, demanding her in knightly and courtly phrases that she would give him leave to go and aid the constable of the castle, who was then plunged in deep distress. The princess granted him leave very willingly, and instantly buckling on his shield and laying hands on his sword, he ran to the inn door where the two guests were still fighting with the innkeeper. But as soon as he arrived, he stopped and stood still, although Maritornes and the hostess asked him twice or thrice the cause of his delay in assisting their master and husband. "I delay," said Don Quixote, "because it is not permitted me to lay hands to my sword against squire-like men who are not dubbed knights. But call me here my squire Sancho, for this defence and revenge belong to him, as is his duty." All this took place outside the inn door, where fists and blows were given and taken, much to the innkeeper's cost, and to the rage and grief of Maritornes and the hostess and her daughter, who were like to run mad on seeing Don Quixote's cowardice and the mischief their master, husband, and father was enduring. However, though the laws of knighthood hindered Don Quixote from fighting, he soon persuaded the guests, by his wise reproofs of their conduct, to leave the innkeeper alone, and pay him what was owing by them, and all would have been at peace in the inn if another traveller had not arrived there at this moment. This was none other than the barber from whom Don Quixote took away the helmet of Mambrino, and Sancho Panza the harness or furniture of the ass, whereof he made an exchange of his own. And while the barber was leading his beast to the stable, he caught sight of Sancho Panza mending some part of the pack-saddle, or panel, as it was called. As soon as he had eyed him, he knew him, and at once set upon Sancho, saying, "Ah, Sir Thief, here I have you. Give up my basin and my panel, with all the trappings you stole from me." Sancho, finding himself attacked so suddenly, laying fast hold of the panel with one hand, with the other gave the barber such a buffet that he bathed his teeth in blood. But for all that the barber held fast his grip of the panel, and cried out so loud that all within the house came to the noise and scuffle. "Help! Here, in the name of the king and justice!" shouted the barber, "for this thief and robber by the highways goeth about to kill me, because I seek to get back my own goods." "Thou liest," cried Sancho, "for I am not a robber of the highways, and my lord Don Quixote won these spoils in a fair battle." By this time Don Quixote himself had come to the spot, not a little proud to see how his squire defended himself and attacked his enemy, and he took him from that moment to be a man of valour, and resolved in his own mind to dub him knight on the first occasion that should offer, because he thought that the order of knighthood would be well bestowed on him. "Sirs," said the puzzled and angry barber, "this panel is as certainly mine, and I know it as well as if I had bred it, and there is my ass in the stable who will not let me lie. So do but try it on him, and if it fit him not to a hair, I am willing to be called infamous. And I can say more, that on the very day on which they took my panel from me, they robbed me likewise of a new brazen basin which had never been used, and cost me a crown." Here Don Quixote could no longer contain himself from speaking, and thrusting himself between the two, to part them asunder, he caused the panel to be placed publicly upon the ground until the dispute should be decided, and said, "To the end that you may understand the clear mistake which this good squire labours under, see how he calls that a basin, which was and is and always shall be the helmet of Mambrino, which I took from him by force in fair battle, and made myself lord thereof in a lawful and warlike manner. In regard to the panel, I meddle not, but I can say that my squire Sancho asked leave of me to take away the trappings of this vanquished coward's horse, that he might adorn his own withal. I gave him leave to do it, and he took them. As for these being turned from a horse's furniture to an ass's panel, I can give no other reason than the common one in affairs of knighthood, that this is done by enchantment. And to confirm the truth of all I say, run, friend Sancho, speedily, and bring me out the helmet which this good fellow declares to be a basin." "By my faith, sir," said Sancho, "if we have no better proof of our story than what you say, the helmet of Mambrino is as arrant a basin as this fellow's trappings are a pack-saddle." "Do what I command," replied Don Quixote, "for I cannot believe that all things in this castle are governed by enchantment." Sancho went for the basin and brought it, and as soon as Don Quixote saw it, he took it in his hands and said, "See, sirs, with what face can this impudent squire declare that this is a basin, and not the helmet that I have mentioned? I swear to you by the order of knighthood which I profess, that this is the very same helmet which I won from him, without having added or taken anything from it." "There is no doubt of that," said Sancho, "for since the time my lord won it until now, he never fought but one battle with it, when he delivered the unlucky chained men, and but for his basin, I mean helmet, he had not escaped so free as he did, so thick a shower of stones rained all the time of that battle." Chapter 29, wherein is finally decided the dispute about Mambrino's helmet and the panel. "Good sirs," cried the barber, "what do you think of those who will contend that this is not a basin, but a helmet?" "He that shall say the contrary," said Don Quixote, "I will make him know that he lies, if he be a knight, and if he be but a squire, that he lies, and lies again 1,000 times. The barber Nicholas, Don Quixote's friend, who was then with the rest, had a mind to carry the jest further, and make them all laugh. So, speaking to the other barber, he said, "Sir Barber, or whoever you are, know that I am also of your profession, and have held a certificate for more than 20 years, and I know all the instruments of a barber's art well. Moreover, in my youth I was a soldier, and I know what a helmet is like, and a morion, and a casque, and other kinds of soldiers' arms. And therefore I say, always subject to better opinion, that this good piece which is laid here before us, and which this good knight holds in his hand, not only is not a barber's basin, but is as far from being one as white is from black. It is a helmet, though, as I think, not a complete helmet." "No, truly," said Don Quixote, "for it wants the half, namely the lower part, and the visor." "That is true," said the curate, who understood his friend's intention, and Cardenio, Fernando, and his companions fell in with this design. "Lord a mercy!" cried the poor barber, half beside himself. "Is it possible that so many honourable men should say that this is no basin, but a helmet? It is a thing to strike with amazement a whole university, be they never so wise. Enough. If this basin is a helmet, then must the pack-saddle be a horse's trappings?" "To me it looks like a pack-saddle," said Don Quixote. "But I have already said I do not meddle with that matter." "Whether it be a panel or not," said the curate, "it is but for Don Quixote to say, for in these matters of knighthood, all these gentlemen, and myself, bow to his knowledge." "Sirs," said Don Quixote, "so many and strange are the things that have befallen me in this castle these 2 times I have lodged here, that it would be rash in me to pronounce a judgment in the matter. To those who say this is a basin, and no helmet, I have made my answer. But whether this be a panel or the furniture of a horse, I will leave it to others to decide." To those who knew Don Quixote's madness, this was a matter of much laughter and good sport. But to the 4 travelers who had arrived that morning, and who were officers of justice, and soldiers of the Holy Brotherhood, it seemed the greatest folly in the world. But he that was most of all beside himself with wrath was the barber, whose basin they had transformed before his face into the helmet of Mambrino, and whose panel, he felt sure, would now be turned into the rich furniture and equipage of a great horse. Those who were in the secret laughed heartily to see Don Fernando go up and down, taking the opinion of this man and that, whispering in their ear that they might give their verdict to him in secret. And after he had gone round to all those who knew Don Quixote, he said to the barber in a loud voice, "The truth is, good fellow, that I grow weary of asking so many opinions, for I no sooner ask what I want to know than they answer me that it is mere madness to say that this is the panel of an ass, but rather is it the furniture of a horse, yes, and of a chief horse of service." "May I never go to heaven," said the poor distracted barber, "if you be not all deceived. It is a panel, and no horse's trappings, but the law takes it from me, and so farewell to it." The barber's simplicity caused no less laughter than the follies of Don Quixote, who said, "There is now no more to be done than for every one to take his own." But at that moment, one of the 4 officers of justice, who had listened to the dispute, full of anger to hear such nonsense seriously spoken, cried out, "If this be not a planned jest, I cannot understand why men of such intelligence as all these seem to be should dare to say that this is not a basin, nor this a panel. For indeed it is as very a panel as my father is my father, and he that hath said or will say anything else must be drunk." "Thou liest like a clownish knave," said Don Quixote, and lifting up his lance, which he always held in his hand, he aimed such a blow at the trooper's pate that if he had not avoided it, it would have thrown him to the ground. The lance was broken into splinters by the fall of the blow, and the other troopers, seeing their comrade so misused, cried out for help in the name of the Holy Brotherhood. The innkeeper, whose duty it was to help all officers of justice, ran for his sword and stood by to help them. The barber laid hold of his panel, and Sancho Panza did the same. Don Quixote set hand to his sword and attacked the troopers, and Cardenio and Don Fernando took his part. The curate cried out, the hostess shrieked, the daughter screamed, Maritornes howled, while Dorothea and Lucinda stood frightened and amazed. The barber battered Sancho, and Sancho pounded him back again, while Don Fernando got one of the troopers at his feet and belabored him soundly. The innkeeper cried aloud for help for the Holy Brotherhood, and all the inn seemed full of wails, cries, screeches, confusion, fears, terrors, disasters, slashes, buffets, cudgellings, kicks, and the shedding of blood. In the midst of this chaos, Don Quixote began to imagine that he was plunged up to the ears in the battle of the King Agramante, and he cried aloud in a voice that thundered through the inn, "Hold all your hands, put up your swords, and keep the peace, if you wish to continue alive." That great and monstrous voice made them all stand still, on which he continued, "Did I not tell you, sirs, that this castle was enchanted, and that some legion of magicians did inhabit it? Note how the discord of King Agramante's camp is among us, so that we all of us fight, and none know for what. Come, therefore, master curate, and make you peace and atonement between us, for I swear that it is a great wrong and pity that so many noblemen as we are here should be slain for so slight causes." The barber was well content that this should be so, by reason that both his beard and his panel had been torn to pieces, and Sancho was at once obedient to his master's voice, as became a dutiful servant. As for the troopers, when they learned Don Fernando's rank and position, they were quieted, but they retired from the brawl grumbling, and by no means satisfied with the turn things had taken. Now it happened that one of these officers, the very one who was so buffeted by Don Fernando, had with him a warrant to take into custody one Don Quixote, who was charged with setting free certain galley slaves. As soon as he remembered this, he must needs try whether the description of Don Quixote tallied with the person before him. He took from his bosom a scroll of parchment, and reading it very leisurely, for he was no great scholar, at every other word he stared at Don Quixote, and compared the marks of his warrant with those in the knight's face, and found that without doubt he was the man that was wanted. No sooner had he made up his mind about this, than holding the warrant in his left hand, he laid hold of Don Quixote's collar with his right so strongly that he could hardly breathe, and cried aloud, "Aid for the Holy Brotherhood, and that you may see that I am in good earnest, read that warrant, wherein you shall find that this robber of the highways is to be taken into custody." The curate took the warrant, and saw that what the trooper said was true, and that the marks described Don Quixote very nearly. As for the knight, when he found himself abused by so base a rascal, as he considered him, his anger was roused to its height, and he caught the trooper by the throat with both hands, in such a way that if he had not been speedily rescued by his companions, he would have given up his life there and then, before Don Quixote would have released his hold. The innkeeper was forced to assist his fellow officer, and his wife, seeing her husband engaged anew in battle, raised a fresh cry, which was caught up by her daughter and Maritornes, who called for help from all the company. Sancho, seeing all that passed, called out, "By my faith, all that my master hath said of the enchantments of this castle is true, for it is not possible for a man to live quietly in it for an hour together." Don Fernando soon parted the trooper and Don Quixote, but the officers did not cease to demand their prisoner, and called on the others to help them to bind him and deliver him up to their pleasure, for so the service of the king and the Holy Brotherhood required, in whose name they demanded help in arresting this robber and brigand of the public paths and highways. Don Quixote laughed to hear them speak so idly, and said with great calmness, "Come hither, filthy and base-born crew. Dare you call the loosing of the enchained, the freeing of prisoners, the assisting of the wretched, the raising of such as are fallen, the giving to those in want? Dare you, I say, call these things robbing on the highway? O infamous brood, how little do you know of the virtue which lies in knight-errantry! We give you to understand the sin and error in which you lie, in not adoring the very shadow, much more the actual presence of a knight-errant. Come hither, I say, and tell me who was the blockhead who signed a warrant of arrest against such a knight as I am. Who was he that knows not the knights-errant are free from all tribunals? Their sword is their law, their valour their court, and their own will and pleasure their statutes? I say again, what madman was he that knows not the privileges that belong to a knight-errant from the day he is dubbed a knight and devotes himself to a knightly calling? What knight-errant did ever pay tax or custom? What tailor ever had of him money for a suit of clothes? What constable ever lodged him in his castle and made him pay his shot? What king hath not placed him at his own table? And finally, what knight-errant was there ever, is, or shall be in the world, who hath not the courage himself alone to give 400 cudgellings to 400 officers if they stand in his way? Whilst Don Quixote raved in this way, the curate was trying to persuade the troopers that Don Quixote was out of his wits, and that even if they did arrest him, they would have to release him afterwards, as he was a madman. Indeed, said the curate, you must not take him, nor do I believe that he will let himself be taken. The officers were with difficulty persuaded to this view, but they had seen enough of Don Quixote to convince them of his madness, and in the end they agreed that it was better the curate should endeavour, as he proposed, to take him to his home than that they should arrest him at the risk of their lives. The dispute between Sancho and the barber was now easily settled, for there was very little left of the panel for Sancho to keep, and the curate, without Don Quixote knowing anything of it, gave the barber 8 reals for the price of his basin, so that they should hear nothing further of the dispute of Mambrino's helmet. Chapter 30, in which is finished the notable adventures of our good knight. The curate and Don Fernando now took the innkeeper aside and settled all his claims against Don Quixote, for he had sworn that neither Rocinante nor Sancho's ass should stir from the inn until he was paid to the last farthing. As for Don Quixote, as soon as he found himself free from all the quarrels by which he had been surrounded, he held it high time to begin his voyage and bring to an end the great adventure unto which he was called and chosen. Therefore, having made up his mind to depart, he went and cast himself upon the knees before Dorothea, and said, I cannot but think, high and worthy lady, that our abode in this castle is nothing profitable, and may turn out to our disadvantage. For who knows but that your enemy the giant hath learned by spies or other secret means how I intend to come and destroy him, and he may by now have fortified himself in some impregnable castle or fortress, against the strength of which even the force of mine invincible arm will be of little use. Therefore, dear lady, let us by our diligence hinder his plans, and let us depart to the place where fortune calls us. Don Quixote said no more, but awaited the answer of the beautiful princess, who, with a lordly air, and in a style not unworthy of Don Quixote himself, replied as follows. I thank you, Sir Knight, for the desire you show to assist me in this my great need, and I trust your desires and mine may succeed, that I may show you that there are some thankful women on earth. As for my departure, let it be as you wish, for I have no other will than that which is yours. Therefore dispose of me at your own pleasure, for she that hath once given the defence of her person unto you, and hath put into your hand the recovering of her estate, ought not to seek to do any other thing but that which your wisdom shall suggest. Let our departure, then, said Don Quixote, be immediate. Saddle me Rocinante, Sancho, and get ready your ass and the queen's palfrey, and let us take leave of the constable and these other lords, and depart instantly. Sancho, who was present at all this, stood wagging his head from side to side, and said, O my lord, how much more knavery is there in the little village than is talked of? What can be noised abroad in any village, or in any of the cities of the world, to my discredit, villain? asked his master angrily. If you are angry, said Sancho, I will hold my tongue, and omit to say that which by the duty of a good squire and an honest servant I am bound to tell you. Say what thou wilt, said Don Quixote, and he waited to hear what his squire had to say. What I mean, continued Sancho, and what I hold for most sure and certain is that this lady, who calls herself queen of the great kingdom of Micomicona, is no more a queen than my mother, for if she were what she says, she would not at every corner be billing and cooing with one that is in this good company. Dorothea blushed at Sancho's words, for it was true indeed that her lover Don Fernando had sometimes on the sly gathered from her lips the reward of his affections. She was neither able nor willing to answer Sancho a word, but let him go on with his speech, which he did as follows. This I say, good my lord, to this end, that if after we have travelled highways and byways, and endured bad nights and worse days, he that is in this inn, and Sancho looked knowingly at Don Fernando, shall marry our princess, and get the fruits of your labours, there is no need to hasten, methinks, to saddle Rosinante, or harness Dapple, or make ready the palfrey, seeing it would be better that we stayed still and looked after our dinner. You may imagine how great was the fury that inflamed Don Quixote when he heard his squire speak so rudely. It was so great that with a shaking voice, a faltering tongue, and the fire sparking out of his eyes, he said, O villainous peasant, rash, unmannerly, ignorant, rude, foul-mouthed backbiter and slanderer, darest thou utter such words in my presence, and in that of these noble ladies? Hast thou dared to entertain such rash and stupid fancies in thy muddled imagination? Out of my sight, monster of nature, storehouse of untruth, armory of falsehood, sink of roguery, inventor of villainy, publisher of ravings, enemy of the respect due to royal persons. Away, villain, and never more appear before me on pain of my wrath. So saying, he bent his brows and glared around on every side as he struck a mighty blow upon the ground with his right foot. And at these words and furious gestures, poor Sancho was so greatly frightened that he could have wished in that instant that the earth opening under his feet would swallow him up. But the witty Dorothea, who now understood Don Quixote's humour perfectly, to appease his anger, spoke to him thus. Be not offended, good Sir Knight of the rueful countenance, at the idle words your good squire hath spoken, for perhaps he hath not said them without some ground, and we cannot suspect from a man of his good understanding that he would knowingly slander or accuse any one falsely, and therefore we must believe that without doubt, as you have yourself said, Sir Knight, in this castle all things are subject to enchantment, and it might well happen that Sancho may have been deceived by some wicked illusion. I vow, cried Don Quixote, that your highness has hit the truth, and that some evil vision appeared to this sinner, my man Sancho, that made him see things that he could not have seen unless by enchantment. For I also know very well that the great goodness and simplicity of the poor wretch is such that he knows not how to invent a lie on anybody living. It is even so, said Don Fernando, and therefore, good Sir Don Quixote, you must pardon him and take him once more to the bosom of your grace. Don Quixote answered that he did willingly pardon him, and Sancho, kneeling down on his knees, humbly asked his lord's hand, which he gave to him, and after he had permitted him to kiss it, he gave him his blessing, saying, Now thou shalt finally know, Sancho, that which I have told thee many times, how that all things in this castle come about by means of enchantment. And this Sancho was ready to believe of everything except the tossing they had given him in the blanket, for he well knew that he had been tossed by persons of flesh and blood and bone, and not by visionary and unreal phantoms and shadows, as his master was always telling him. 2 days passed, when it seemed to all the noble company at the inn that it was time to depart, and they considered how, without putting Dorothea and Don Fernando to the pain of turning back with Don Quixote to his village, the curate and the barber could carry him home as they desired, and leave him cured of his folly in his own home. This was the plan they decided on. They made a bargain with a wagoner, who chanced to pass by that way with a team of oxen, to carry him in the following manner. They made a thing like a cage of timber, so big that Don Quixote might sit or lie in it at his ease, and presently Don Fernando, Cardenio, their companions, and the innkeeper did all, by Master Curate's directions, cover their faces and disguise themselves as well as they could, so that they might seem to Don Quixote to be different persons to any he had seen in the castle. This being done, they entered silently into the place where he slept, reposing after his recent battles. They went up to him as he was sleeping peacefully, not fearing any such accident, and, laying hold of him forcibly, they tied his hands and feet very strongly, so that when he started out of his sleep, he could not move, nor do anything else but stare and wonder at the strange faces that he saw before him. And immediately he fell into the idea, which his wild imagination had at once suggested to him, that all these strange figures were spirits and phantoms of that enchanted castle, and he believed that he himself was without a doubt enchanted, seeing that he could neither move nor defend himself. All happened as the curate who plotted the jest expected, and after they had brought him to the cage, they shut him within, and afterwards nailed the bars thereof so well that they could not easily be broken. Sancho all this time looked on in wonder to see what would happen to his master. Then the phantoms mounted him upon their shoulders, and as he was carried out of his chamber door, the barber called out in as terrible a voice as he could muster, "O knight of the rueful countenance, be not grieved at thine imprisonment, for so it must be that thine adventures be more speedily ended. And thou, O most noble and obedient squire, that ever had sword at girdle, beard on a face, or dint in a nose, let it not be dismay thee to see carried away thus the flower of all knighthood. For I assure thee that all thy wages shall be paid to thee, if thou wilt follow in the steps of this valorous and enchanted knight, and as I am not allowed to say more, farewell." Don Quixote listened attentively to all this prophecy, and said, "O thou, whatsoever thou beest, I desire thee to request in my name that I may not perish in this prison before my work is ended. And as concerns my squire Sancho Panza, I trust in his goodness that he will not abandon me in good or bad fortune. For though it should fall out through his or my hard lot, that I shall not be able to bestow on him an island, as I have promised, his wages cannot be lost to him, for in my will, which is made already, I have set down what he is to have for his many good services." Sancho Panza bowed his head with great reverence when he heard this, and kissed both his master's hands, which were bound tightly together. Then the phantoms lifted up the cage and hoisted it on to the wagon that was drawn by the team of oxen. After bidding farewell to all their friends, the procession started. First went the cart guided by the carter, then the troopers, then followed Sancho upon his ass leading Rocinante by the bridle, and, last of all, the curate and the barber, riding their mighty mules with masks on their faces. Don Quixote sat with his hands tied and his legs stretched out, leaning against a bar of the cage, with such a silence and such patience that he seemed rather to be a statue than a man, and thus at an alderman-like pace, such as suited the slow steps of the heavy oxen, they journeyed home. At the end of 2 days, they arrived at Don Quixote's village, into which they entered about noon. This was on a Sunday, when all the people were in the marketplace, through the midst of which Don Quixote's cart passed. All drew near to see what was in it, and when they knew their neighbor, they were greatly astounded. A little boy ran home before to tell the old woman and the niece that their lord and uncle was returned. It would have moved one to pity to have heard the cries and lamentations the two good women made, and the curses they poured out against all books of knighthood, when they saw Don Quixote enter the gates of his own house again in so strange a carriage. Sancho Panza's wife, when she heard of his return, ran forward to meet her husband, and the first question she asked was whether the ass were in health or no. Sancho answered that he was come in better health than his master. "Tell me then," cried his wife, "what profit hast thou reaped by this squireship? What petticoat hast thou brought me home? What shoes for the little boys?" "I bring none of these things, good wife," replied Sancho, "though I bring things better thought of and of greater moment." "I am glad of that," said his wife, "for I should like to see them, to the end that my heart may be cheered, which hath been swollen and sorrowful for so long, all the time of thine absence." "Thou shalt see them at home," said Sancho. "Therefore rest satisfied, for when we travel once again to seek adventures, thou shalt see me shortly afterwards an earl or governor of an island, one of the best in the world." "I pray that it may be so," replied his wife, "but what means that island? For I understand not the word." "Honey is not made for the ass's mouth," said Sancho, "but thou shalt know all in good time. Do not busy thyself, Joan, to know all things in a sudden. It is enough that I will tell thee all the truth, and therefore close thy mouth. I will only say this much unto thee as yet, that there is nothing in the world so pleasant as for an honest man to be the squire of a knight that seeks adventures." Now, if I were to tell you that Don Quixote got quite well and lived quietly at home after all these adventures and never went abroad again, I should tell you what is not true. For some day, and I hope at no great distance of time, you may read what the great Cervantes has written, not only of the adventures of which I have told you the story, but of the second part of Don Quixote's adventures, some of which are even more wonderful than the first. There you will learn how Sancho Panza became at last the governor of an island for a short space, and may read of the great wisdom and shrewdness with which he ruled. All these good things will be yours to read some day, as they have been mine, and are everyone's. For, like all the really great stories of the world, this of Don Quixote belongs to no nation or people, but is the property of each and all of us, given us freely to enjoy it how and where we will. And from the humour and wisdom of such books, we may become brighter and better ourselves, so that when I wish that you may be able to love and honour all such books, and to read this one as Cervantes wrote it, and with the care it deserves to be read, it is the best wish I can give you. And indeed, to wish you the gift of understanding it is the same thing as wishing you a happy life.